Donald Trump, by way of his utterances and activities, finds himself completely isolated by allies, enemies, everyone.
Iran is, quite frankly, looking at this closure as a pressure point on the international community. Well, I think the Europeans are worried that there is no end game, that it could be that they get sucked into an open ended conflict. Trump has been extremely wary about how he handles China and is looking to do a deal with China. India, he has been signaling that he doesn't see India as a major strategic partner, and because he sees China as the most important partnership.
Hello and welcome. You're watching me, Sanket Upadhyaya, on TheFederal. The show is called AI with Sanket because this is the AI of news. News in India today requires not artificial but analytical intelligence. And one place where we can surely do with a lot of analysis is how Donald Trump is treating this situation with Iran, this war. He, along with the Prime Minister of Israel, who seems to be struggling these days in trying to prove that he's still alive with 5 fingers and a coffee mug, waged a war on Iran. And now, almost like a cycling back effort, both these countries, particularly Donald Trump, are looking for alliance partners. The expectation is that everyone must join this war which Donald Trump has waged on Iran. They call it the good cause. And what does Trump want done? He wants the Strait of Hormuz to be resecured for the international shipping line, for international trade, for crude oil and LPG to move freely. It impacts 20% of the global trade as far as oil is concerned. This has been impacted because Iran has absolute control over the Strait of Hormuz. And Donald Trump now wants each and every country, adversary and friend, to send their navy to secure the Strait of Hormuz and teach Iran a lesson. The only problem here is that nobody wants to trust Donald Trump. He finds himself all alone in this war. Nobody wants to send their troops or their ships to secure the Strait of Hormuz. Many of these alliance partners like Britain and the European Union say this is not our war to fight. We won't get drawn into a larger conflict. In a situation like this, with friends and adversaries both against Trump, is this war a position where Trump finds himself isolated? He's tried to reach out to his opponents, China, Russia. But will he be successful? Let's put this to a discussion on whether Donald Trump finds himself completely isolated on the world map. Joining us right now is Ambassador Meera Shankar, former ambassador to the United States. Thank you very much, ma'am, for joining us. At the outset, would you agree with a lot of analysts who say that Donald Trump, by way of his utterances and activities, finds himself completely isolated by allies, enemies, everyone in this war against Iran, where nobody is willing to trust him, nobody is willing to follow in his footsteps? What is your reading?
Look, I think the Europeans initially said they support the war and that Iran cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. So they said they support the military action by the United States. Now, when the expectation that the initial military action and the assassination of Iranian leaders would lead to regime change has not come about, and it looks like there may be a more extended conflict, I think there are reservations which many of the European countries have expressed. And in response to Trump's request for a coalition of navies and naval ships to escort shipping in the Straits of Hormuz so that oil shipments are not blocked. The response has been very tepid or ambiguous or negative. So, Spain, of course, has been strongly against the war, and they said, our position is the same, whether Ukraine or Gaza or Iran, our position remains the same. We are opposed to this kind of military intervention. But as I said, other European countries had expressed support for the military action initially. But now, like Keir Starmer said, we are not going to be drawn into a wider conflict. Though, of course, they said they are considering how best they can be helpful in the Straits of Hormuz. And interestingly, Ed Miliband, their energy secretary, basically said, we could send, for instance, mine attacking drones, but we are still discussing this with our allies, and this is important, we could explore the possibilities of de escalation. Now, this is the first time that I have heard this from a Western leader. And now you have, of course, Germany. The Germans have also said that this war doesn't have the mandate of the UN or NATO, and therefore, and they cannot join it, and they were not consulted when the war was launched. Um, the European Commission is looking at the possibility of involving the UN in some kind of deal, to strike some kind of deal with Iran, where some opening would be possible, like the Ukraine-Russian grain deal, which allowed Ukrainian grain to be exported through the Black Sea ports. I don't know if that will work, because Iran is, quite frankly, looking at this closure as a pressure point on the international community, which faces, increasing energy prices and shortage of energy, to pressurize the US and Israel for an early end to the conflict. So I'm not very clear whether it will work. Iran, of course, has said they have not closed it except for the US and its allies. They are allowing Chinese ships to come up to the Strait of Hormuz and to load. And the US also has said, for the moment, we are allowing Chinese ships to enter the Straits of Hormuz and load up. For India, the Iranians have not given a blanket waiver. They have said, we are willing to discuss ship by ship. Now, two ships have actually come from the Straits of Hormuz with Iranian help. And the US has also said they will allow Indian ships to pass the Straits of Hormuz without trouble. So now we are engaged in a ship by ship diplomacy with Iran to ensure that more of our ships can come through, because 22 Indian ships, Indian flagged vessels, are stuck in the Straits of Hormuz. And then there are other ships which carry the flags of other countries, but which have oil loads or gas loads meant for India. So we are, it's a very delicate situation, and clearly one where, as the External Affairs Minister said, if we can, work through reason and through diplomacy with Iran, I think that is the way to go for India. And maybe it's a pointer for the international community too.
Ambassador Shankar, we'll come to India in just a short moment, but United States, and for, as you rightly mentioned, most of its alliance members suggesting that they don't want to be drawn into a wider conflict, are we to assume that this is a vote of no confidence in the war by these alliance partners? So much so that Donald Trump is also threatening uh, the whole existence of NATO. That I don't know what is going to be the relevance of NATO if you do this. So, do you think that people do not want to get drawn into a conflict where they say that this is not our war?
Well, I think the Europeans are worried that there is no end game, that it could be that they get sucked into an open ended conflict. And their second anxiety flows from the fact that they think that this actually takes attention away from the war in Ukraine, where they are already having to shoulder additional responsibility since the US has cut back on its own supplies of military equipment and assistance, financial assistance, etc., to Ukraine. Though the Europeans are buying US military equipment and giving it to Ukraine. So there is an additional burden on Europe, and they are concerned that if they take their eyes off the ball in Ukraine, the situation could deteriorate. Uh, they also worry that, because of the pressure on energy prices, sanctions on Russia have been waived, and they don't necessarily support this, even though for a country like India, that's an important step because this is a very difficult situation, and certainly we would need to step up our imports from Russia.
Since you mentioned Russia, I want to ask you, Ambassador Meera Shankar, do you feel that this is an interesting time in geopolitics where you have strange bedfellows for America, where suddenly there is an elevated element of interest that Trump has in China and its leadership to free up Hormuz, where it is supposedly giving permission to buy Russian oil to other countries, and these are traditionally not very friendly nations for the United States.
Yes, I mean, clearly, you see, Trump has turned traditional geopolitics and international arrangements on their head. Uh, he seems to be more concerned about striking deals with other great powers on spheres of influence, and certainly China, where he had initially come in all guns blazing and imposed very heavy tariffs, total taking it to almost 145 percent. He has changed course since China used its leverage by blocking the supply of rare earths and critical minerals, where they have a virtual stranglehold on international supply chains. They are the main supplier across the world. Since then, Trump walked back his tariffs on China. The 145 came down dramatically. Today it's 30% plus 10% for, I think, fentanyl, uh, uh, exports of fentanyl precursors, and there are tariffs which were applied in Trump's first term, which continue. So overall, the assessment is that China faces tariffs of about anywhere between 29 to 30 something percent. It's very difficult to calculate because there's such a maze of tariffs. This is a big step down from 145%. And since then, Trump has been extremely wary about how he handles China and is looking to do a deal with China. You see, even in their national security strategy, which they have put out, the Trump administration has put out, they talk about China as an economic competitor and say that if they can put issues of unfair trade behind them, if they can deal with those, then this promises to be a mutually beneficial relationship where both sides could benefit. So it's a very different way of looking at the China relationship, but also the relationship with Russia. In that same national security strategy document, Trump talks about the fact that the Ukraine war need never have occurred. It's a kind of unnecessary war, and, how they want to reset relations with Russia. And it's quite clear in the way he's been handling the negotiations with Ukraine that he is exhibiting a certain impatience to get on with the job so that the US can develop a profitable, mutually profitable relationship with Russia, particularly in the areas of resources where Russia is has an extreme, extremely good endowments, but also in the wider context of global geopolitics, where uh, there's a view that if US and Russia are able to reset their relationship, then this tilts that strategic triangle of US, Russia, China, at least, if not tilts it, evens it out. Because at the moment it's Russia and China and US on the other side. So it's a very different way of looking at geopolitics. And clearly, vis-a-vis India, he has been signaling that he doesn't see India as a major strategic partner. And because he sees China as the most important partnership, so India is a corollary to how that partnership develops.
Interesting. Ambassador Meera Shankar, do you feel the key word over here is going to be trust? And especially with Trump at the helm. Your alliance partners are not willing to trust you. You want to reach out to your adversaries and want them to trust you. You look at the sort of things Trump said to European countries, from their civilization ending to you are not the era of Winston Churchill anymore, his comment for the United Kingdom, and all sorts of, constantly berating, all sorts of tariffs imposed on Europe, and this for people who were supposedly, in alliance with you. Now the NATO threat. So do you feel that adversaries will find it even more difficult to trust this person called Trump?
I think the adversaries like China and Russia are pretty clear eyed. They've been practitioners of realpolitik, not idealism in international relations. I think other partners and allies for whom Trump has reserved his harshest criticism and his most punitive actions, like Canada, are talking about the need to create a concert of middle powers, because that would actually then expand a little bit the space that these countries have in dealing with the behemoths.
All right, Ambassador Meera Shankar, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for joining us on The Federal.